Hello, a very warm good evening to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to another episode in our series of Conquer Prelims, where today we deal with the portion of Environment and Ecology. Now, as is the case with this series of Conquer Prelims, we are talking about the current affairs which have been in news from the month of January to May 2024. And the couple of sessions that you have scheduled for Environment Ecology, that is today and tomorrow, we shall be taking a look at a comprehensive coverage of all the relevant areas for Environment Ecology which can be important for your examination of the prelims. And along with the discussion of the topics, we shall also be taking a look at the PYQ and also the sample questions which can be framed from these topics. I urge you to do take a look at these questions and try to solve it at that point itself so that you understand the wordings, the language and the framing of the question which UPSC throws at you at the prelims exam. Now, if you want to download the PDF of this particular session, you can join the Telegram channel and download the PDF. Now, a brief overview about what the lecture is going to be about. So for Environment Ecology, we have two lectures. So today is going to be lecture 1 and tomorrow we will have lecture 2 at the same time. So what is it that we are going to cover in lecture 1 and lecture 2? So that you also have an idea about how to revise and how to consolidate. So there have been various different topics in news, various different concepts in news, like base flow. For example, suppose Humboldt enigma. So that is where here, first of all, we are going to talk about the topics and concepts in news. From here, questions are definitely going to be asked in the exam. Then, other than that, today we shall also be covering some of the species in news. And some of the initiatives. Right? Now, tomorrow, that is in lecture 2, we are going to cover the reports, various different reports associated with environment and ecology. We are going to cover the portion of protected areas in news, all the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries that you think are important. So you don't need to ratify all the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries and the Ramsar sites which are there, just those which have been in news. So that is something we shall be channelizing and concentrating upon tomorrow. And then again, some of the species in news. Why species in news is diverted and broken into two parts? So that it is easier to consume and you don't get confused in the terminologies associated with the various different species. Okay, so this can be your source of revision, final source of revision for the prelims exam when it comes to current affairs. Now, without further ado, let us take a look at the first topic that we are going to discuss today, and that is Humboldt's enigma. Now, Humboldt was a very famed geographer and one of those last surviving polymaths. Now, he was known to tour and travel the entirety of the world in order to explore geographical findings. Now, Alex von Humboldt's entire contribution in terms of environment ecology as well as geography is unparalleled. Now, when Alex von Humboldt visited the region of South America, he made various different observations. Now, that is where the name Humboldt is generally associated with the various events in South America because of closer association of Alex von Humboldt with South America. That is why you will find on the western margins of South America, you have a cold ocean current which is also known as the Humboldt current. That is why in South America recently you had a glacier which disappeared and that was also the Humboldt glacier. So Humboldt has an intricable and a kind of a very important linkage with the geographical aspects of South America. Now, there was a study which had been carried out in the region of South American mountains which indicated a variation in terms of the richness of biodiversity that you find in the hilly areas. And that is what is referred to as Humboldt's enigma. Now, I will summarize the entire concept of it, but first of all, the basics associated with speciation. Speciation, in a meaningful sense or in a brief gist, what do we understand when we talk about speciation and the existence of biodiversity? The presence of biodiversity in the world. what is the scale of biodiversity? How many different types of species are to be found? Right? Not only the number of population, but the different types of species that are found. So the world's tropical areas, they generally tend to receive energy from the sun at a higher rate and at a greater magnitude. And that is why the speciation changes when you talk about the tropics and when you talk about the temperate regions of the planet. Historically, if you take a look at it, when you compare tropics and when you compare the temperate regions, where do you think greater variety of species are to be found? Always, greater variety of species will be found in the region of the tropics. And why is it so? There are two reasons associated with that. First reason is something which is listed in the written portion. That because the tropical region receives greater amount of sunshine, means what? Which means there will be greater amount of plant presence, right? The tree presence, the natural vegetation will be more. Why? Because the rate of photosynthesis will also be more. That rate of photosynthesis will increase the growth of natural vegetation. Isn't it? Now, another reason why you have greater number of species in the region of the tropics, that is associated with the historical concept of the region of the tropics. You see, the planet through the various different ages has gone through different phases of ice ages, where the temperature of the planet has cooled down and majority of the parts of the planet have been completely covered in ice and they have been frozen. So, the coverage and the presence of ice age time and time again every few thousand years, what is explained by the geographical phenomena of Milankovitch cycle, that has always impacted the temperate regions. So, temperate regions go through freezing activities, through freezing during ice ages. Okay? During ice age. So that means every few thousand years, the diversity of species which are to be found in the temperate regions, they end up getting altered. But the tropics, they remain ice-free even during the ice age because of greater amount of solar insolation. So you have constant conditions of temperature, constant conditions of solar insolation, due to which the species are able to diversify. Because of these two reasons, tropics will always have greater amount of biodiversity. I hope this is something which is understood. Now, once this is understood, then let us understand what exactly is associated with or what is exactly referred to when we use the term Humboldt's enigma. So Humboldt's enigma talks about the variation in the diversity of species when it is found over the region of the tropics in general as compared to a mountainous area. Why? Because when we talk about a mountainous area, now in the region of a mountain, as you move higher up in altitude, there will be variation in temperature. The temperature tends to reduce as per the normal lapse rate, isn't it? At the same time, you will also find that the amount of rainfall or precipitation, that also varies. So that is why in the region of the mountain, what do you find? That at the foothills, suppose, there will be greater amount of rainfall. You might find tropical forest, tropical deciduous, in certain cases tropical evergreen, but broad-leaved trees and broad-leaved forests, that is something you will find at lower elevations. As you move slightly higher up, you will find wet temperate forests, right? Because the rainfall is still high, but the temperature starts to get low. So wet temperate vegetation. Then as you move slightly higher up, then you will find the coniferous vegetation, the boreal vegetation. What is the taiga vegetation? Cheer pines, deodars, chinar, all these kind of trees will be found, particularly when we talk about it in Indian context. Then as you move slightly higher up, the trees won't be found anymore. At greater elevation, the wind speed increases, the existence of the trees, that becomes a very difficult proposition. So that is where at a greater height, you will then find the presence of grasslands. For example, the seasonal grasslands in the Himalayas, like the Bugyals, those kind of grasslands and alpine meadows is what you find at an elevation of around 2000, 3000 meters. As you move slightly higher up, that is when you start finding tundra vegetation, right? So what do you observe here? You will observe that in a small distance, this cannot be more than a few kilometers in terms of its width. But in that small distance, observe how the natural vegetation is undergoing a massive change from tropical, moist and wet forest at the foothill to the tundra vegetation within a distance or a displacement of a few kilometers or a few hundred meters. So the variety and the richness of the species here, is very high. Richness of species. Now, this is what is Humboldt's enigma. That even if a hill or a mountain, if you consider it in the temperate regions, its biodiversity in certain cases can be more than what you experience in the subtropics and tropics, because of variety of conditions and a variation in climatic conditions that they offer. And always keep one thing in mind, guys, that when we talk about entirety of environment ecology after all is what? Your understanding of biosphere. And the biosphere you get always as an interplay between atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and sometimes cryosphere. That's it. So temperature will change, the conditions of water availability will change, species will change. So greater variety of species in a small distance, even in the temperate region as compared to the other regions. That is Humboldt's enigma. Now here, this also talks about, and the research which has been carried out also talks about the fact that there is a variation in terms of the species diversity when you consider the mountains in comparison to which are old and the newly formed mountains. For example, here let us compare the region of Western Ghats and the region of the Himalayas. So when we talk about Himalayas are newly formed mountains. They are still evolving. They are still very, very young, isn't it? So that is where the kind of species that you will find there, that is still in its evolutionary phase, because the conditions have not been stable. The conditions have not existed in a stabilized form for a long period of time. They are still evolving. The height is changing. The precipitation patterns are changing. The rainfall conditions along with the temperature conditions, everything is changing. But when you consider the Western Ghats, they have remained like that for a very, very long period of time, for millions and millions of years. So that means you have constant conditions which are prevalent. For a long time. So when you have constant conditions, for every biodiversity richness, you need the conditions to be constant. So that would always mean greater biodiversity. The amount of biodiversity will be greater. So that tells you that not only will the mountains have greater amount of biodiversity as compared to the plain region, but also when you consider older mountains, there the amount of biodiversity shall be much more as compared to the newly evolving and newly formed mountain region. Now, impact on India is what we see as we compare two of the biodiversity hotspots. In India, in total, you have 4 different biodiversity hotspots. For example, you have the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka as one biodiversity hotspot. You have the Himalayan alpine region as another biodiversity hotspot. Then you have Indo-Burma forested region as another biodiversity hotspot. And then along with that, you have the presence of Sundaland biodiversity hotspot, which also covers the region of Great Nicobar. So these are the 4 biodiversity hotspots, out of which 2 of the biodiversity hotspots are in the mountainous areas. So the presence of mountains both north and south as well as across the central extent of the country means that they enrich and enhance the species diversity that we have. As you would see, and if you follow the current affairs, every few days or every couple of weeks, there is a new species which is discovered either in the region of the Western Ghats or in the hills of the northeast. Generally, you will not find those many new species being discovered in the region of the Himalayas, partly due to inaccessibility, but also because of the fact that it is a landform which is still evolving. It is not stabilized. Frequent landslides, they keep on changing the kind of vegetation which is there. And that changing of vegetation, that changing of the grazing lands, that alters the ability of the species to enhance their population. So that is where impact on India, increased diversity. In which portions? In the region of Western Ghats in particular. If we talk about only in the terminologies of hotspot, so Western Ghats, then Indo-Burma hotspots, Eastern Himalayas, and the Eastern Hills, there you will find greater amount of biodiversity. Okay, so I hope the understanding of Humboldt's enigma is clear, right? So Humboldt's enigma in a nutshell, the greater variety of species and the greater amount of biodiversity that you find in the hilly region and the mountainous area as compared to the plain region. And why? Because the temperature, precipitation characteristics, they end up varying as compared to with the increase in altitude. Okay. Now, let us take a look at the practice question. So here, consider the following statements about the distribution of species across the planet. Species do not prefer extremities of climate, and hence we find greater variation of species in the moderate and the temperate areas. An old mountain system in the tropics can have a greater biodiversity as compared to temperate regions of the world. Which of the statements is or are correct? Think about it. Do let me know. C, both 1 and 2. Okay. Deepak, Tejaswini, Manikram, you are correct. So first statement, let us take a look at the first statement. Species do not prefer extremities of climate, and hence we find greater variation of species in the moderate climate of temperate regions. Do we find greater variety of species in the temperate regions? No. There is a greater variety of species to be found where? In the region of the tropics. Because of greater amount of solar insolation means increased rate of photosynthesis, as well as greater amount or the a consistency of temperature conditions over the past many thousand years. Then, an old mountain system in the tropics can have a greater biodiversity as compared to temperate regions in the world. Always, consistency of temperature will be the key here. So the correct answer in this case will be B, that is 2 only. Right? So that is the correct answer. I hope you are able to understand this, and with this I hope you will be able to answer all kind of questions which are framed from this. Okay? Isn't this relative statement one will find? No, whenever there is the statement about the greater variation of species in the temperate region, you will never have as compared to anything. Generally, it is always compared to the tropics. If the second statement talks about the tropics, that means the entire framing of the question is associated with that. So you will never have greater variation of species in the region of the temperate areas. Okay. Now, then brumation was in news owing to increased amount of various sightings of reptiles, alligator species, etc., which stand frozen. Many of the times you would also have seen those videos and those images on social media and various different news platforms as well, which shows an alligator species and different species of turtles, etc., which end up appearing as if they are frozen, right? So that is what is referred to as brumation. They don't completely freeze to death, but basically they go for a prolonged sleep. Now that prolonged sleep is carried out why? That is carried out to lower the rate of metabolism. Because what happens is, when the conditions become very harsh outside, let's suppose it becomes increasingly cold or any kind of harsh conditions prevail outside, then the availability of food, that becomes scarce. And also, in general, the habitat becomes very difficult place to live. So that is why what the species do, they lower their energy requirements. Always they lower their energy requirement. If let's suppose I am awake throughout the day, the natural chances are that I will be hungry at least twice or thrice a day. But what if I had the ability to sleep through the day? Many of the students have that. But let's suppose you as a candidate sleep through the day. You will not feel that hunger. Why? Because your body has not burnt enough calories. Your body has not spent that much energy, and you will be able to conserve that energy. So your requirement for food reduces, right? So lowering the rate of metabolism is done by going for prolonged sleeps, right? This lowers the requirement of energy requirement. Okay. But then isn't it the same story that you hear about hibernation as well? That hibernation is also something similar. So what is the difference then? Well, you see, hibernation is oftentimes carried by the warm-blooded organisms. Whereas when you talk about brumation, it is mostly carried out by the cold-blooded organisms like reptiles, amphibians, few of them. Okay, so when we talk about hibernation, I will give you the difference also in a consolidated fashion so that easy for you to revise before the prelims. But that is the general difference. There are other ways also in which the species, they go for prolonged sleep, right? You have estivation, then you have diapause. These are also various different types of prolonged sleep. So here, brumation is the name to describe a period of dormancy or slowed activity in reptiles, much like hibernation in the case of mammals. So brumation typically carried out in cold-blooded organisms. Typically occurs during the colder months when the availability of food is very, very scarce. Reptiles enter a state of brumation to conserve energy and survive these adverse environmental conditions. Now here, when you take a look at the type of species, most of them will be the cold-blooded species. This is the image that I was talking about. You would have come across these kind of images very regularly. So here, typically carried out by reptiles as well as amphibians. Okay, they carry out the process of brumation. But then there are other different prolonged sleep and the sleep cycles that the species also enter through. So there are 4 different sleep cycles: hibernation, brumation, estivation, and diapause. What are those? Just the technical parameters of it. Hibernation again is a winter sleep, but chiefly carried by the warm-blooded animals, right? That go into that winter sleep. For example, polar bear is one of those species that you will observe. They go for hibernation, isn't it? Then brumation, typically carried out by cold-blooded animals. Again, both of these are associated with winter sleep. Winter sleep. Then estivation. Now estivation is when certain species, they can go through, for example, certain types of lizards, certain types of reptiles as well. In the desert areas, the summer months become atrocious. Availability of water is so scarce that the survivability of the species becomes a difficult proposition. That is why you will find many of the species, they enter into the cracks of the rocks, the various different deep burrows into the ground, and they stay there and go into that prolonged sleep cycle to reduce the energy requirement and thereby to be able to reduce the water consumption and other consumptional requirements. That is estivation. So that is generally observed in the desert areas. Okay. And then you have diapause. Diapause also carried out at the level of planktons, for example, at the level of microbial population as well, where when the conditions become harsh, they suspend the metabolic activities of the body for an indefinite period, right? Unlike the case of hibernation, brumation or estivation, which is a summer cycle or a winter cycle, diapause can extend for a long period of time. Butterflies are known to carry out diapause, but many of the microbial population, even the plankton, the zooplankton population, they are also known to be carrying out the process of the diapause. Okay, so I hope these four are clear. Other than that, there is a daily sleep cycle as well. Brumation generally lasts for one season. Okay, one season is where the winter season is where the brumation will exist, chiefly carried out by alligators, reptiles, those species. Okay, cold-blooded organisms. Now there is another resting cycle or sleep cycle, but it is on a daily basis. That is the daily torpor. Right. This is a daily phenomena. This is observed by birds certain times where they end up slowing down the metabolism rate during the day itself to get some rest. This is a very temporary phenomena, which is like a prolonged sleep during the day itself. Okay, so that is the entire concept of suspension of the metabolic activities followed by the species. Now let us take a look at the practice question. Consider the following statements about the adaptations indicated by the species to save the energy. Reptiles slow down their rate of metabolism to save energy not by hibernation but by brumation. Estivation is carried out by the species of butterflies. Hibernation is carried primarily by warm-blooded organisms. How many of the above is or are correct? What do you think? Satyam, animal freeze for decades, that zombie virus in permafrost that you're talking about, that will be diapause. Very good. So here, let us take a look at the first statement. Reptiles slow down their rate of metabolism to save energy, not by hibernation, but by brumation only. No. Only is an extreme term here. The reptiles can also go for estivation. Okay? In the desert areas, reptiles can also go for estivation. Estivation is carried out by the species of butterflies. Estivation is generally carried out where? In the deserts. In deserts, you don't generally find the species of butterfly. Butterflies go for diapause in most of the cases. Incorrect. Hibernation is carried primarily by the warm-blooded animals or warm-blooded mammals. So here, third is correct. So how many of the above is or are correct? Correct answer will be A, only one. Here, many of you have given the correct answer, which is good to see. Now, then a species which had been in news, that is the conjoined silver-lined butterfly. Now, this silver-lined butterfly was a unique species of butterfly to be found in the region of Western Ghats. Now, for your prelims preparation, the species in news has to be referred in a unique manner. So how do you refer those species in news? Because that is a bigger problem. Rather than tackling individual species, what do you refer to whenever you see any particular species being mentioned in the past 12 to 16 months? First thing first, you have to take a look at the features of that species. Don't start an investigative journalism about all the features of the species, the basic features of the species that should be known. Then after that, the region where they are to be found, right? Or to which region is it endemic to? And then, if possible, if the data is available, then go for the conservation status as well. If not, then don't go for it, because UPSC is not going to ask you before IUCN catalogs the data. So conservation status. This has to be the approach for any species which comes in news. Okay, so conjoined silver-line butterfly. This was a unique species of butterfly which is found in the region of the Western Ghats. Now, it is named as Sigaritis conjuncta or conjoined silver-line. It was first spotted in 2008, but the research of it started happening in 2021, and then it was discovered around January 2024. The researchers found 5 male and 4 female specimens where? In the Kodagu district of Karnataka. Kodagu district is where you have the presence of which geographical feature is present in the region of the Kodagu district? That is also where you have the origin of river Kaveri. So that is how you can interrelate geography with this particular portion. Which hill structure or hill feature is present in the region of Kodagu district? You have the presence of Brahmagiri Hills. Brahmagiri Hills, they form, that is a protected area region as well. And this is the region where you have the origin of river Kaveri. Okay, also serves as origin of river Kaveri. Origin of Kaveri. In the region, more precisely so, the origin of Kaveri, the place where it happens, that is Talakaveri in the region of Brahmagiri Hills itself. Now that is where, again, associated with the Humboldt's enigma, interrelated. So in Humboldt's enigma, what did we study? That in the older hill ranges, the temperature conditions, the rainfall conditions have been consistent for a longer period of time. Vegetation is going to be similar for a longer period of time. Height is not going to extend into the tundras. So you will have rich vegetation across the old hill structures. So the biodiversity, all the scales of biodiversity will be enriched in these older hill regions. And that is the same case here as well. That is why you will find greater variety of species. Now, here, the unique feature of this particular butterfly is the unique color pattern, as is the case with many of the butterflies, but the color pattern on the upper side of the wings and the underside, they are completely different overall. Now here, the 4 wings, they don't have the division as is observed in the case of the butterflies, and they are fused together. The bands on the top wings are fused together without separation. Now, when you don't have separation present in the wings, the butterflies, they face an issue when it comes to sudden change of directions. For example, if you take a look at the species of dragonfly, if you would have observed it, it has got 4 different wings, and each of them, they move separately like a helicopter. So as a not in the sense of a circular rotation, but in the sense they all have individual and independent motion. As a consequence, you will find the dragonfly to be able to lift itself very quickly. You will find the dragonfly to be able to change direction very swiftly, and you will also find the dragonfly being able to hover over the same region for a longer duration. So that is the evolution of the species of insects as it has happened in the species of flies. In this case of butterfly, you have the 4 wings which are actually fused together, which means what? the changing direction part becomes difficult. That these kind of species, they will find it very difficult in order to migrate to various different areas. That is why they have a restricted zone. And in India, we find them to be endemic in the region of Western Ghats, right? That is where, in the hills of the Western Ghats, is where you find a greater proportion. Okay? I hope that is understood, right? The lower wings have spots that are connected to form broad bands with irregular outlines, just like any other butterfly that you come across. Okay? Now, observe the kind of question that UPSC will throw at you when it comes to the species in use. Consider the following statements about conjoined silverline recently in news. It is endemic to the Sundaland biodiversity hotspot. It is to be found in the Piedmont zone of the Western Ghats and cannot survive at elevations beyond to above 200 meters. They are uniquely known for similarity of pattern in upper side and underside of the wings. Which of the above statements is or are correct? B, D. Okay. So let us take a look at each of the statements. First statement, it is endemic to the Sundaland biodiversity hotspot? No. Sundaland biodiversity hotspot in India, which is the portion which is covered under Sundaland biodiversity hotspot? It is the region of Great Nicobar Islands. Only the Great Nicobar Islands in India is situated in Sundaland biodiversity hotspot. So that is incorrect. It is to be found in the Piedmont regions. Piedmont means the foothills, right? Foothills of the Western Ghats and cannot survive at elevations beyond 200 meters. Can this be correct? When we know that they are found in the region of Brahmagiri Hills, not in the Malabar Plains, not in the Coromandel Plains, but Brahmagiri Hills. So how can we say they are found only at the region of the sea level or at the foothills? So this is incorrect, right? Then they are uniquely known for similarity of pattern in upper side and underside. That is not the case. Patterns are different. So the answer is D, none of the above. Okay? I hope this is clear. Now, the pattern and the fused forewing is what you have to keep in mind, and its endemism, endemic to where. Many of the times UPSC will also throw a question at you that certain species names it will give you. Which kind of species is this? Is it a fish? Is it a butterfly? Is it like that kind of question? So there it will only give you conjoined silverline. It will not use the terminology butterfly there. So you will have to be alert enough to tackle with those kind of questions as well. Piedmont zone is the region of the foothills. Foothills. In the foothills, for example, you refer to Piedmont zone where even when you talk about soil distribution, even when you talk about rainfall pattern, in the Piedmont zone on the eastern side of Western Ghats, you will find the presence of red soil because they are dry in terms of the climatic conditions. You have less rainfall, so you will find red soil, right? You have similarly the presence of Ozark Plateau in US in the Piedmont zone to the west of Appalachians. So that is where the term Piedmont is used. Mont, mountain, Pied to the foothills of it. Okay? I hope that is clear. Then greenwashing has been in news for a couple of years now, but last year again it was prominently in news. So what we will do, we will understand the types of greenwashing and the variations which are found to be present in them. What is the concept of greenwashing? First of all, so it involves making an unsubstantiated claim to deceive consumers into believing the company's products are environmentally friendly or have a greater environmental impact or a greater positive environmental impact as compared to what they are. In simplest of the terms, let's suppose you have an organization, let's suppose you have a corporate which manufactures a product like a shampoo, let's suppose. Procter and Gamble or Head and Shoulders is what you would have heard. Let's suppose Head and Shoulders produces shampoo. Now, Head and Shoulders for the production of shampoo might have polluted multiple rivers, might have polluted various different coastal environments as well. But while making a claim, it might say that it is environmentally friendly, right? It is not containing microplastics, it is environmentally. So those false claims many of the times which are made, that is what is referred to as greenwashing. This is where it is used to spread false information, misinformation, and lure the customers into buying the products. Now, this has been under increased scrutiny because with the passage of time, the corporate and the private players, they are asked and they are expected to pitch in more to conserve environment and to protect environment as well. So here, if you take a look at the greenwashing, how is greenwashing done? So greenwashing is done by various different ways. One of the way is the imageries of the environment. That is very prominent nowadays. You will find that the various different bottles or various different packaging products, they will have the picture of the entire Amazon forest in front of them. It might be selling acid inside, but on the face of it, on the externality of it, it will have absolutely beautiful environmental pictures. So that creates a kind of an image misconception in the mind of the consumer. Then misleading labels, eco-friendly, completely degradable, right? So for example, the plywoods that you see, plywood industry is known for those misleading labels that if you use this plywood, your life will be different. These are environmentally friendly. But majority of the plywoods that you come across, majority of them, they are done or they are manufactured by the wanton cutting down of the trees illegally. So that is misleading label. Hidden trade-off, that you might say that this product is completely degradable. But for manufacturing of that product, you have deforested 1 hectare of land. You have polluted the entire region of the river delta. As a consequence, thousands of species are dead, but your bottle of shampoo, you say that it is environmentally friendly. So that is again the hidden trade-off, irrelevant claims. You come across the recent and the newly catching up scam of biodegradability. Almost anything and everything has got that terminology used. It is completely biodegradable. Now, nobody is going to check it because for that matter, in full honesty, if I take a plastic, let's suppose I take this plastic pen, I say it is completely biodegradable. Now, only if you ask me will I tell you that it is degradable. It will degrade itself in the next 400 years. You start a scientific cycle for the next 400 years, you will see this degrading. Who will verify that claim? So that is where the claims which are made in terms of biodegradability nowadays, in terms of plastics in particular, that is where the greenwashing is carried out. And whether you are cutting down trees in order to prepare a biodegradable product, or you are polluting the river in order to prepare an environmentally friendly product. So there is an evil on both sides. So like this, you carry out greenwashing. But you see, greenwashing is only one of those kind of environmental, let's suppose, duping to the customers which is done by the organizations. There is the concept of green hushing, green crowding, all of that. So that becomes relevant for your prelims exam. So what is that? Green lighting. What is green lighting? Green lighting highlighting a minor sustainable effort to distract from larger environmentally damaging practices. Tomorrow, let's suppose I have a petrochemical extraction plant. Now I am extracting oil and petrochemicals, let's suppose, from the shallow continental shelf. During that process, many of the deep water corals, many of the shallow water corals, all of them are dying. Many of those, let's suppose, the species in the coastal areas, they are dying. While I am refining my petrochemical, I am basically emitting the waste and I am discharging the waste into the open land. The land is getting degraded. But on the side of it, I highlight that, look, I have planted 5 trees and I have carried out Miyawaki method in my workspace. I am conserving few of the animals in my workspace. So I will highlight that. I will get all the PR agencies to talk about it as if how I am the biggest savior of the environment out there in the world. What is that? That is green lighting. You are highlighting the wrong portion of it. You are hiding the realities. You are highlighting only a small portion. Take the case here. I'm not saying that it is exactly the reflection of green lighting, but take the case of Reliance Petrochemicals. Reliance Petrochemicals is in the business of oil refining. Now that is very carbon intensive as well. Now on the face of it, today, if you take a look at Reliance's activities in Gujarat, most of the news channels, most of the searches on the internet will give you what? The Vantara Animal Reserve, right? For animal rehabilitation. That is a good initiative. That should be carried out. But at the same time, you should address the environmental degradation that you are carrying out in other of your corporate businesses. Various different large companies like ExxonMobil, which have carried out oil spill in the region of Gulf of Mexico, which had led to hypoxic waters being created there for a long period of time, which many researchers are indicating had also impacted the thermohaline circulation in the oceans. Now, ExxonMobil, these kind of companies, Shell, all of them, they have done this green lighting. Then you have green hushing. What is green hushing? Deliberately underreporting or hiding sustainability action to avoid scrutiny. That if I say I'm environmentally friendly, tomorrow 5 people will try to study whether I'm in fact environmentally friendly or not. They might find some loopholes. So let's not talk about it at all. Right? That is green hushing, where your entire claim will be verified. For example, as a candidate, you can associate with it. Let's suppose tomorrow I ask you that have you covered geography? Even if you would have covered geography and environment, you will be slightly hesitant that if I say I have completed, this fellow might ask 2 or 3 difficult questions. Rather than that, let's say that we are still trying to cover. So that is green hushing. Stay out of limelight, stay out of trouble. That is the key mantra for the corporates. Green rinsing. Regularly changing or resetting your environmental goals and targets to avoid accountability. You change the goals themselves. You say that 2025, my aim will be planting 1 lakh trees. In the month of October, you say that my aim is to plant 100 trees. I have planted 100 trees. So that is green rinsing. Green shifting. Shifting the blame for environmental impact onto consumers rather than addressing corporate actions. For example, tomorrow let's suppose as the summer approaches, you want to buy a soft drink. You go and buy a bottle of Coca-Cola. Now, Coca-Cola in the bottle itself will tell you reuse, recycle and reduce. They will show that sustainability triangle. Now, after that, if you throw the bottle, you are the one who is polluting. It is a different matter that Coca-Cola supplied you the soft drinks in plastic bottle. But now you are a pollutant of plastic. They are not. Right? So that is shifting the blame. Green shifting. Then you have green crowding. If the entire industry is not following the norms, who am I to be blamed for following the norms? So that is being lost in the crowd. Right? So nobody has done the homework. So I alone will not get the punishment. If there will be a harsh punishment, it will be for everyone. So that is where you have the green crowding, getting lost in the crowd. So hiding poor practices by aligning with groups or industry-wide body so that you are not the only defaulter out there. Then green labeling. Misleading environmental labels, biodegradable plastics. Many of them are using that green labeling. So these are the various different types of green washing. Okay. Green rinsing is that you change the goals. Prior to achieving them itself, you keep on changing the goals. When you keep on changing the goals, then what is the purpose of setting the goals in the first place? Right. So that is the process of green rinsing. I hope these 6 are understood. Right? Now, if these 6 are understood, then solve this question. Consider the following pairs: green hushing, green lighting, and green shifting. Green hushing, underreporting of climate actions to avoid scrutiny. Green lighting, regularly changing the environmental goals. And green shifting, hiding poor practices by aligning in large groups. How many of the above is or are correctly matched? None of them? A. Okay. Green hushing, underreporting of climate actions to avoid scrutiny. Is this correctly matched? The first one? Yes. Green lighting, regularly changing the environmental goals. No. Green lighting is highlighting a small component and then hiding your larger environmental degradation. Green shifting, hiding poor practices by aligning in large groups. This is green crowding. Green shifting is what? You shift the blame. Remember the Coca-Cola example. This is also incorrect. So how many of the above are correctly matched? The correct answer is A. That is 1 only. This is green crowding. And then what is this? Regularly changing the environmental goals. That is green rinsing. So this is your green rinsing. This is your green crowding. Okay? I hope this is clear. Now, deep sea corals have been in news for the past year and a half. So the chances of them being asked this year or the next year are incredibly high. Now, what are these deep sea corals? So basically last year, a group of scientists had carried out the discovery and research in the region of eastern part of North America. And that is the region where a large amount of cold water corals have been found. Now you see, when you talk about the corals overall, the corals, based upon the conditions in which they grow, they are classified into warm water corals, as well as the cold water corals. Okay? These warm water corals, they are to be found in the region of the tropics. They are to be found in the region of photic zone of the water, where the sunlight is available. Cold water corals are found in temperate regions, and also in many of the cases in the aphotic zones. In many of the cases, not in all the cases. So be very careful when you take a look at one of those absolute statements, right? Absolute statements as in the cold water corals can only be found at the bottom of the sea floor or in aphotic zone. It is incorrect, right? So these cold water corals can be found from a depth of around 50 meters to a depth of 200 meters and more, stretching into the aphotic zone and stretching into the base of the seafloor. Because the base of the seafloor in itself is not explored properly, that is why much is not known about the cold water corals. They have a similar kind of pigment and tissue structure as compared to the warm water corals, but there is some slight difference. So deep sea corals are defined as corals that live at depths greater than 50 meters. But most species live in depth several hundred meters deep in cold, dark, rocky bottoms of the seafloor. Unlike shallow water coral reefs, which are limited to warm tropical waters, deep sea corals are found throughout the world oceans. Now, which of them will be larger in number? Warm water corals or cold water corals? What do you think? Which of them will be larger in number? It will always be the warm water corals, because the presence of the photic zone, particularly in the tropics, is going to be very large. So warm water corals are, till now, in what we have discovered, in what we have come across, warm water corals are to be found in much greater proportion. Always keep that in mind. Warm water corals live in a symbiotic relationship with the algae that is zooxanthellae. This algae carries out the production of food by the process of photosynthesis. Whereas when we talk about the cold water corals, because they are found, and the deep sea corals because they are found in aphotic zone where sunlight is not available. That is why it is not always the case that there will be the presence of algal structure. There are certain evidences which have indicated the presence of chemotrophs, right? The chemotrophic microorganisms associated with the cold water corals. Now, while the diversity of corals that build up species in the shallow waters is very high, which is hundreds of species, there are only 6 species of deep sea stony corals. So a question can be framed, again a multi-statement question, which species or which has got greater species diversity. UPSC has asked this previously in the prelims exam as well. The most common is Lophalia pertusa. That is one of the Lophalia varieties, Lophalia 1, Lophalia 2. You have many varieties of Lophalia. Lophalia will give you an image like a kind of a tiny stem having multiple of these small branch of sorts. Right, that is the structural pattern of Lophalia. And it will mostly be stony white, colorless in general. Okay. That is the Lophalia variety, which is found in the region of the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Southern Atlantic Bight, all these. Now, the role of algae, right? So here, the deep sea corals, they lack algae in general. And that is why they are bright white in coloration. Example, Lophalia. But the shallow water corals, they appear bright white only after the coral bleaching has happened. Otherwise, they will give you vivid coloration patterns. Then these precious corals, that is the deep sea corals, they are known to be ancient and slow growing, very slow growing. And they have a very large life cycle. Okay, please understand that. In fact, the oldest known animal on earth was a black coral that had been dated to 4,250 years old. So you can imagine how old these corals can get. How, in the sense, ancient can these corals get. They grow very slowly and they are able to survive for a longer duration. Okay, this is the distributional pattern as indicated by the various different international agencies associated with the warm water and the cold water coral. Here you will observe certain patterns. For example, the coastal area of India. So the red coloration is indicative of the warm water coral, and the blue coloration is indicative of the cold water coral. So here observe the red coloration is quite dominant in various parts of the planet. Right. Across the entirety of the coastal area of India, you will find the presence of the corals. However, these corals will not be found in regions where you have the mouth of major rivers. Why? Because wherever you have the mouth of major rivers, there will be heavy amount of sedimentation, large amount of silt, mud, which will be carried by the river channel. And the corals, the warm water corals in particular, they require availability of sunshine in the photic zone so that the algal species can carry out the process of what? Photosynthesis, right? Now, that is why in the region of Sundarbans, for example, you will not find the corals. But western coastline, the Malvan coastline, all the way till the region of the Malabar coastline, you will find these corals. Then, this is the region which is also known as the Coral Triangle. That is the region of Indonesia, Malaysia, the Javan Sumatran region, the region of North Australia, Great Barrier Reef, Solomon Islands. All of these are included, and that is what is the Coral Triangle. Okay. Now here the variety, the diversity of corals is extraordinarily high. So that Coral Triangle is important. Then other than that, You'll find them wherever you have the island structure, shallow water body, there you will have the presence of these warm water corals. Cold water corals, here off the coast of Norway, you have a very large Rost reef, which is a cold water coral. Then in this area is where you will have again the presence of cold water corals. Because they are found at the bottom of the sea floor, they are said to be impacted much more by the events such as ocean acidification. Ocean acidification is what? Where the availability of carbonate ions is not there anymore. You don't have the presence of carbonate ion structure anymore. So that is why you will find that in the deep water, the lack of availability of carbonate ions means the cold water corals will be impacted much more at a greater extent as well. Okay? Now, they don't grow in muddy water, yes. In which type of water do we find corals? You will find corals in the region of the area of shallow water body, saline water in primarily. You don't find the corals present in river water, saline water, sea water. Now, depending upon where in sea water are they found closer to the sea surface? That is a warm water coral. If they are found in deeper depths, then it is a cold water coral or a deep sea coral. Okay, that is the extent of the coral. Now, a coral triangle is the region between Indonesia, Malaysia, the Javan Sumatran Islands, the region of Solomon Islands and northern Australia, including the Great Barrier Reef. Because here you will have hundreds and thousands of small islands which are present. Owing to the volcanic eruptions which have happened regularly in the past, you have hundreds and thousands of volcanic islands which are there. So that provides lot of shallow water region. So those shallow water region that is immediately closer to the coastline is where you will find lot of these variety of coral species. So that is why both the number and diversity is very high. Now, in this edition of Places in News, we have also covered about the golden triangle. So, coral triangle, golden triangle, lithium triangle, these become vital for your Places in News. So, all those who have not still taken a look at the video for Places in News, please do take a look at the Places in News for the month of December. That will again further enrich your revision for your prelims examination. Okay? Now, after this, let us take a look at the practice question. So here, consider the following statements about the deep sea corals. As compared to warm water corals, they are impacted more as a result of ocean acidification. As compared to warm water corals, they have a greater temperature tolerance range. Which of the statements given above is or are incorrect? Let me know. Yes, Saksham. Cold water corals can also be found in the let's suppose tropical zone at a greater depth. Kanishak, Shubham, Samvriti, correct. So here, as compared to warm water corals, they are impacted more as a result of ocean acidification. Is that true or not? That is true. The impact on ocean acidification will be high. As compared to warm water corals, they have a greater temperature tolerance range. Now, will that be correct? No, this will be incorrect. Why? Because at the region where they are found, at the base of the ocean, at the deep sea floor, in majority of the cases, you will find that the temperature has been consistent throughout the period of history. So that is why the temperature tolerance range is much less in these species. As the species evolve, when they experience a variety of temperature during evolution, they are evolved to basically face that variety of temperature. But when they have grown and evolved in a fixed temperature window, then their body is not adapted to the changing temperature condition. So At the surface, you still have slight variation in temperature by a couple of degrees, 24 to 26, 26 to 27, like that. But at the ocean bottom, at the deep sea floor, in the aphotic zone in particular, beneath the thermocline, that is when the temperature is almost consistent around 4 degrees Celsius. So that is why these corals are not adapted to thermal tolerance, right? So which of them are incorrect? Here, the correct answer will be B, that is 2 only. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now, there was a previous year question asked from this as well. Now, answer this as well. Most of the world's coral reefs are in tropical waters. More than 1/3 of the world's coral reefs are located in the territories of Australia, Indonesia, and Philippines. Coral reefs host far more number of animal phyla than those hosted by tropical rainforest. Now, if you take a look at the answer key for UPSC, we will assume that itself as the correct answer. So, most of the world's coral reefs are in tropical waters. The warm water corals are much more abundant. That is correct. Now, more than 1/3 of the world's coral reefs are located in the territories of Australia, Indonesia, and Philippines. This is also correct. That is very much a part of the coral triangle. Now, third statement is a bit controversial statement. Coral reefs host far more number of animal phyla than those hosted by tropical rainforest. Now, you see, there are certain researchers which indicate that tropical rainforests have more greater number of insect population in itself. They have greater number of bird variety as well. But as far as UPSC comes into the picture and as far as the relevant documents come into the picture, there is an established correlation that the corals will have greater amount of biodiversity as compared to the tropical rainforest. So, as per UPSC, this is correct. So, the correct answer we will assume is 1, 2, and 3. Yes, that is why corals are known as the tropical rainforest of the submarine or the marine ecosystem, because of the two reasons and the two purposes that they solve. Corals will provide the availability of dissolved oxygen into the water by carrying out the process of photosynthesis with the help of the algae. And secondly, corals themselves, they don't carry out photosynthesis, but the algae do. And secondly, you will find that these corals, they also provide shelter to a wide variety of biodiversity, from mollusks to crustaceans to the variety of fishes. So that is why they are serving as the rainforest of the submarine ecosystem. So D, 1, 2, and 3 are correct, right? Now, then Vulture Restaurant was also in news because Vulture Restaurant had been set up in Jharkhand for the conservation of species, right? Here, when we talk about Vulture Restaurant, this entire concept of establishing vulture restaurants, what is the principle behind it? So, in our subcontinental region, there has been an evidence of a large scale wiping out of the vulture population. Earlier, the vulture population in the region used to be very abundant. For the first time, the substantial decline in vulture population was observed in the Keoladev National Park. In which state is Keoladev National Park situated? Do let me know. So that is where it was observed that almost 97% of the known vulture species in that region that declined, right? So after that, a greater attention started being paid to the vulture conservation. You had a vulture conservation center which was established in Pinjore as well. Yes, Keoladev is situated in Rajasthan. Very good. So that is how the conservation started. It was found that many of the cattle, the dead cattle, which are consumed by the vultures, those dead cattle, they have the presence of the drug diclofenac. Diclofenac. Now, this diclofenac causes, that is something which accumulates in the body of the cattle, and over a period of time, as the vultures, they feed upon the dead, that is when the diclofenac enters their body, impacts their nervous system, causes issues like the drooping of the neck and so on. So that diclofenac was banned and has been banned. Project Vulture as a program was initiated in 2006 to ensure greater conservation. Then the concept of these vulture restaurants, they started gaining prominence, where the aim was that let us prepare certain area where all the dead cattle, or let's suppose the dead organisms in those regions, they don't have the presence of chemicals. Because many of the times what was also observed, that because the crops and the feed that you give to the organisms, that feed consists of chemicals. So the animals also have the chemicals inherently present in their body. So when they consume them, that is where the eventual animals have the biomagnification, bioaccumulation that reaches to the vulture population, which is leading to the decline in vulture population. In India, overall, you have 9 species of vultures, right? Out of which 4 of them are critically endangered. That critically endangered, which species are critically endangered, that is something you should be aware of. Okay? Now here, if you take a look at the decline in population and Project Vulture, Project Vulture was initiated in 2006, and recently Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, they have gone for the Vulture Action Plan 2020 to 2025. This is a kind of revitalization of the Vulture Action Plan, which expired almost a decade back. So here, the vulture conservation centers will be established across the country, breeding programs will be carried out, and chemical-free grazing grounds will be made available for the cattle so that the vultures have enough food. Now, the plan focuses on minimizing the use of diclofenac, a substance which is harmful for the vultures, and that is the way in which these restaurants are established, where you have those kind of wooden enclosures where the dead carcass is kept. Now, those wooden enclosures are built so that even the feral dogs, right, or the other wild animals, they should not be able to pollute the dead body with the various virus and the chemicals that they might have gained in their body. So a full-fledged isolated program. Now, these are the variety of vulture species that you find in India. Out of that, if you observe, 4 of them are critically endangered. Which of them are critically endangered? White-rumped vulture, right? Then slender-billed vulture. Then you have Indian vulture. The 3 variety of gyps vulture that you have, they are critically endangered. And then you have red-headed vulture. WRIS. Right? That is white-rumped vulture. Then you have the red-headed vulture, Indian vulture, and the slender-billed vulture. WRIS, all of these are basically critically endangered. Okay? Now, this vulture population is very important for providing ecosystem services. The importance of vultures is in nutrient cycling, in decomposition of the food products as well, degradation of the food products, and many of the times it happens that in the wild animals and in the dead organisms, you have certain damaging pathogens, bacterium, etc., which comes into them. Now, bacterium such as anthrax or microbes such as anthrax, etc., which can cause harmful diseases if they are spread into the nature. Vultures, when they consume them, their digestive system is so highly acidic that all these microbes, all the germs are killed. So in a way, that is the terminal end or the terminal point for all the microbial population. So that is why the presence of vultures also ensures that the pathogens, the harmful pathogens and germs, they are eradicated from the larger spread. At the same time, the entire decomposition process enriches the soil fertility, returns back various nutrients into the soil, and is a part of nutrient cycling. So they help in decomposition and nutrient cycling. Then they carry out disease prevention. And vultures are always a kind of indicator species. They give you an indication of whether the region is pesticide and chemical free or not. If lot of pesticides, lot of chemicals are used, then vulture population won't be found in that area. Okay? So here, that is what you have to understand. The threats: loss of habitat due to urbanization, food scarcity and contamination, and many of the times electrocution due to power lines also. So which are those critically endangered, right? You have WRIS. Okay, so that is what you have to keep in mind. So this kind of a question is what many of the students are scared of. So let us take a look at this kind of a question. Consider the following species of vultures to be found in India: Indian vulture, Himalayan griffon, white-rumped vulture, slender-billed vulture. How many of the above have been categorized as critically endangered by IUCN? So I hope we shall be able to recall WRIS and not go with the impulse action of marking D, right? So Indian vulture, white-rumped vulture, and slender-billed vulture. These are basically critically endangered. The only R1, that is the red-headed vulture, is missing in this. So these three are critically endangered. Please do not forget that WRIS. These are critically endangered. Okay? Right? Now, yes, that is where newer chemicals are also being banned recently, but then diclofenac still remains one of the major issues. After that, you had an entire phase where aciclofenac was used, but it turned out that in the longer process, that also turns out to be harmful. That is where the next alternative was meloxicam. Meloxicam as a drug or a kind of anti-inflammatory medicine that you give to the cattle. So meloxicam is seen as a viable alternative. All the other varieties of drugs which are given to the animal slowly and steadily, yes, the numisulide has also been banned. But still, in the major and the entire aspect of vulture conservation, diclofenac remains the prima donna reason for the decline in vulture population. Okay? Now, then, this was a question asked previous year as well. Vultures, which used to be very common in Indian countryside some years ago, are rarely seen nowadays. This is attributed to which of the reasons? The destruction of their nesting sites by new invasive species, a drug used by cattle owners for treating the diseased cattle, scarcity of food available to them, a widespread, persistent and fatal disease amongst them. So here, the correct answer would be B. So I hope even this PYQ appears to be easy. This was easy otherwise also. Now, the concept of ecocide has been gaining prominence for the past couple of years. So what is this entire concept of ecocide? As you see, the news articles across the world, they talk about the Pacific Island nations propose ecocide to be adopted as international crime. Particularly the small island nations, they are talking about island nations like Vanuatu, etc. They are basically raising the clarion call for terming ecocide as international crime. So what is that ecocide? Right? Windmills can be a threat as well, but they are not present in that larger density and they are present at a slightly greater height. So, but yes, they can also be a threat. Right. First question incorrect. Okay, at the end, I will take more questions. So whichever questions that you have, we will solve it at the end. Now, ecocide. What is ecocide? Now, it is defined as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to environment being impacted. Rather than the complex definition which is provided by WEF. I always say definitions are meant to confuse you guys. So rather than ratifying the entire definition, think about it. Environmental genocide or ecological genocide. That is the terminology which has been combined together. For the first time, this term was used way back in the 1970s when you had large-scale environmental damage. So that is the concept of ecocide. Large-scale environmental destruction. Not one, if you cut one tree, that will not come into the category of ecocide. So large-scale environmental destruction or damage. Okay? That is your ecocide. Now, when we talk about climate change, oftentimes we only talk about the curative measures which can be taken. But we also have to be cognizant of how various different regions and various different countries, they have been violating the environmental principles and damaging the environmental norms. So already you can see that ecocide is a crime in 11 countries, whereas 27 other nations are still deliberating laws. For example, Mexico is where this debate has been raging quite significantly for some time now, because in Mexico, there are various infrastructure projects all the way till the region of the Yucatan Peninsula. And in that area, lot of biodiversity and coastal habitat and coastal ecosystem is going to be damaged. So activists are basically raising a demand that this should be an environmental crime. This should be an international crime. Because oftentimes, even when you talk about marine spills, oil spills, etc., they cause large-scale damage beyond your own national border and national jurisdiction. So that also comes into the category of those ecocides, right? So, for example, Russia is where you already have an ecocide law, but Australia, Brazil, Mexico, these are where the ecocide laws are being mulled upon. The argument is going back and forth. Now, what is the condition in India? In India, we still have not managed to quantify the environmental damage. There is the Godavarman judgment of December 1996. Now, that Godavarman judgment, which was issued by the Supreme Court, that talks about conserving each and every part of environment, each and every part of ecology. Not a single tree should be cut, because cutting down of any tree comes under the category of deforestation and environmental damage. So there is that crucible which has been fixed by the Supreme Court, where it talks about the environmental conservation. But we don't have the measure of what will be categorized as large-scale environmental damage. Will the Great Nicobar project be under that large-scale environmental damage or not? So that is where we are still in the doldrums. We still have not quantified it. So our stance is uncertain, and we are very far away from making a law against the entire concept of ecocide. We have individual laws for wildlife conservation, for forest conservation, for environmental protection, for biodiversity conservation. We have all these laws, but then we don't have a substantiated law against ecocide. Okay? Now, then Himalayan wolf, that is a species where the first ever IUCN assessment of the Himalayan wolf has been carried out. Now, IUCN has carried out a detailed assessment of the population of the Himalayan wolf. Now, Himalayan wolf, which is to be found in the high altitude reaches, particularly in the area of the Himalayas, the region of Tibet. Now, that is where its population has been found to be dwindling, and the population has been found to be lesser than expected. Right. So the Himalayan wolf, which is under the name of Canis lupus chanco, now a prominent lupine predator, is found across the Himalayas. It is also called Tibetan wolves. The altitude for any species in use, features, geographical extent, and conservation status. So what is the feature? Lives at more than 4,000 meter altitude. They are genetically different from grey wolves. Now they are adapted to live in low oxygen conditions, because with greater altitude, availability of oxygen tends to reduce. Now, this is the entire geographical extent of the Himalayan wolf. Okay? But in India, you have other variety of wolf as well. The common variety of Indian wolf that you see, that is the Indian or the common or the peninsular wolf, that is also to be found in the central parts of India and the Deccan Plateau, the southern part of India. The Himalayan wolf is different. It is slightly brighter in terms of its appearance as well. Now, why is it under decline? The reason for the decline in the quantity of Himalayan wolves. First of all, the natural habitat is getting destroyed. That is getting depleted. Now, you also have the case, when I say natural habitat getting destroyed, what is the feedstock of this Himalayan wolf, what do they consume? They will be consuming the herbivores. Now, the grasslands in the region of the Himalayas, they are under increased threat because of various anthropogenic as well as natural factors, due to which the herbivore population is also declining. Other than that, there is encroachment in those natural spaces. So, destruction of habitat, depletion of the wild prey population due to activities like overgrazing, the availability of food for various different other species of ungulates, for example, sheep, natural varieties. That population is, that natural variety of those species, that is declining. Increased population of feral dogs. Now, the feral dogs, many of the times they kept as guard dogs for guarding those cattle. That is also impacting the wolf population in terms of access to food. And oftentimes the feral dogs, they mount an attack as well. And that is what spreads diseases in many of these Himalayan wolves, impacting their survivability. Okay, so the region we have seen, the reasons for decline we have seen, and the features we have seen. Conservation status, vulnerable. Recall that. Vulnerable, Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act. Okay, now take a look at the question. Consider the following statements for Himalayan wolf recently in news. It is the only known variety of wolf found in India. It has been listed as vulnerable by IUCN. Loss of grasslands in Himalayas impacts their chances of survival. Which of the statements is or are correct? So what do you think is the correct answer in this case? So the correct answer in this case, first statement, it is the only known variety of wolf. No. You have the common Indian wolf also to be found. It has been listed as vulnerable. Yes. Loss of grasslands in the Himalayas impacts their chances for survival. Yes. By impacting the population of the herbivores. Right? So here, which is correct? B, 2 and 3 is correct. Okay? Now, golden langur, also another species which has been in news. So where is it found? In the northeastern part, in the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. That is where it will be found. Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot, particularly in the region of Assam Plains. Diversity hotspot. Okay, so it has been noted that the features, first of all, their fur changes color according to the season. The young and the adults, they also have variation in the color of the fur that they have. Right? Habitat, moist evergreen and tropical deciduous forests. So that means, what is the rainfall amount where they will be found? Tropical deciduous and moist evergreen, around 120 centimeter and more. That is where you will find these kind of rich vegetation. That is where you will find this kind of species as well. Right? So also in some savannas, that is in the grasslands, tropical grasslands, it may be found in elevation close to the sea level in the south and up to 3,000 meters at the foothills of Bhutan and in the north. Right? So geographical extent limited to Assam and neighboring Bhutan. Now, the area foothills of Bhutan to the north, Manas River, Sankosh River and Brahmaputra River. These form the boundary region for the extent of this particular golden langur. Right? If this golden langur is in question or has been in news, that means Brahmaputra River also becomes important for your examination. Again, one portion we have discussed already in the places in news. So I'm assuming that your revision for that is done, including Sankosh, Teesta, all of these tributaries as well. That is the habitat and the extent. Conservation status, endangered as per IUCN, and maximum conservation as per CITES as well as Wildlife Protection Act. Then, Terai Arc landscape. Now, this is a large protected flagship area which has been declared by the UN for celebrating the decade of environmental restoration. So UNEP along with FAO, these organizations are relevant for your exams. UNEP along with FAO have named 7 initiatives in the UN World Restoration flagships. So as a part of UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the World Restoration Flagship Awards are provided. Okay. Now, what are those 7 flagships? The Restoring Mediterranean Forest Initiative in the region of Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, and Turkey. Then Living Indus Initiative for the conservation of the Indus River Basin. Owing to the floods in Pakistan, the devastation was immense. So conservation of the natural habitat in the region. The Acción Andina, the social movement across the region of the Andes and South America to give and empower the local indigenous population with greater say in environmental conservation. Then Sri Lanka Mangrove Regeneration Initiative, Tarai Arc Landscape Initiative, Regreening Africa's Agriculture to Prevent Desertification, Growing Forests in Africa's Dryland Initiative. These are your 7 flagship UN World Restoration programs to celebrate the UN Decade on Environmental Restoration. This is your entirety of Terai Arc Landscape. The combined area of northern UP, Uttarakhand, Bihar, as well as the region of the foothills of Nepal. Here you have 3 major species which are to be found. One is the Royal Bengal tiger. Another is the elephant, the Asian elephant. And the third major species to be found is what? One-horned rhino. So you have 3 major such species which are to be found. Okay, so in this foothills, the Tarai belt at the foothills of the Himalayas is where you will find that critical biodiversity because of increased amount of natural vegetation. So starting from Corbett National Park and Tiger Reserve to Rajaji, Dudhwa, Pilibhit, then even when you talk about Katarnia Ghat, which is a part of Terai Elephant Reserve, Dudhwa National Park, the North Keri, the entire protected region. Then if you come to the east, you have the Valmiki National Park in the region of North Bihar. All of that is under conservation. So the Tarai Arc landscape is an 810-kilometer stretch between river Yamuna in the east and to river Bagmati in the Yamuna in the west to Bagmati in the east, comprising Shivalik Hills and the adjoining region of the Tarai floodplains. It is spread across the Indian states of Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. That is important for your prelims, where it is spread over, right? And moves into the low-lying hills of Nepal. Okay, let us take a look at the question. Which of these protected areas are situated in the Tarai Arc landscape? Corbett Tiger Reserve, Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary, Buxa Tiger Reserve and the Pilibhit Tiger Reserve. How many of the above is or are correct here? Flagship means, Saroj, one which carries greater mascot or greater aim of conservation rather than just the literal meaning of conservation. How many of them are correct? So Corbett Tiger Reserve, very much a part of it. Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary at the border of Nepal, a part of Terai Elephant Reserve, very important part. Buxa Tiger Reserve. Buxa is situated in West Bengal, right? So there you don't have the Tarai Arc landscape. Then the Pilibhit Tiger Reserve, again a part of it. So here you have 1, 2 and 4. So 3 of them are correct. So the correct answer is C. I hope like this you are able to develop the approach. Now Indian skimmers, they have been in news as India and Bangladesh have been talking about including this bird species, unique bird species that you find, that is which to be a part of the Convention on Migratory Species, that is the Bonn Convention, because it frequently migrates from one region to another. So that is the Indian skimmer. So which kind of species is this? That becomes important. So it is native to South Asia and it flies very low to the water body, right? So because it flies almost skimming the water body, hence the name skimmer. So it gets its name from the way it feeds, flying low over the water surface and skimming for food, mainly found in India, Bangladesh and Pakistan, with some population extending even in Myanmar. So the subcontinent region, warmer condition, availability of fish as a food. Now, one of the key areas where you can spot this is the Chambal River. Chambal River had also been in news for the sighting and the increase in population of the gharials, right? So there you will also find or be able to spot the skimmer population. Primarily occurs on larger sandy and lowland rivers. So here the skimmers, if they have for food the presence of fish, small crustaceans and insect larvae, they will always be found closer to the water body, right? So dried river beds, wetland areas, that is where you'll find them. Okay? Conservation status is endangered. In this case, it is not listed under CITES because the trade is not happening. The reason why Indian skimmer is in news is because of the fact that this particular species has been migrating between India and Bangladesh, and there needs to be a conservation effort to include them under CMS or the Bonn Convention. Okay? Tomorrow we will also be discussing about the conference of parties of the convention. For example, the Bonn Convention conference of parties had happened in Samarkand. So a brief background of that also we shall be discussing tomorrow itself. Now, the last topic, that is base flow. Now, this is partly associated with the geographical concept. And this is an interesting concept where a research had been carried out about the reason for frequent flooding in the peninsular rivers, because the peninsular region does not have that much amount of rainfall. Having said that, the incidences of floods have become very frequent in the region of the peninsular rivers. So that is where the researchers have indicated the concept of base flow being responsible. So what is the base flow? So you see, when you consider the moisture on the soil, that is water present in the top region of the soil. Then below that you have supersaturated condition, where you have the presence of the water table. Below that you have the water which moves into the nearby rivers. That is the portion which is known as base flow. So contribution of water to the river from the saturated zone or groundwater to the river flow, that is known as base flow. This is your base flow. So what is the concept of base flow and how is it associated with floods in the peninsular region? Just concentrate for 2 minutes and you will understand this concept. So you see, if let's suppose in a region, if I were to simply draw the cross-sectional analysis of the water table, let's suppose here the water table is like this. And if there is increased rainfall which has happened for 4 to 5 days, here as the water table is slightly higher, can we imagine a situation where there will be greater pressure on the water table? Once we are able to imagine a greater pressure on water table, are we able to imagine that this will push greater amount of flow into the river? So volume of flow in the river, that will suddenly increase, isn't it? So that leads to frequent flooding. This base flow has been responsible for recharging the river channels with the passage of time. Overall, if you take a look at it, a detailed overview at it, if this is the stream which is flowing, observe that immediately it is the water from the surrounding region which flows into the river stream. At a deeper level, it can take centuries for water to move into the stream. At a much deeper level, it can take millennia for water to recharge that stream. But at a shallow level, this will happen after a few days of rainfall event itself. So base flow in a nutshell is the supply of water from the groundwater reservoirs into the river. So wherever the base of water table is higher and after increased rainfall, that means increased pressure of water supply into the river. That means incessant flooding. Okay. So that is linked to the flooding in the peninsular rivers, right? I hope that is understood. So that brings us to the end of the first lecture for the portion of Environment Ecology. I hope you have liked the comprehensive coverage of topics in this particular lecture. This is for the month of January to May. Tomorrow again, we shall be convening and we shall be talking about the concepts, the reports, and the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, the tiger reserves, the status of leopards, these kind of things which have remained in news for these particular months. Do revise them. If you have liked the video, please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button, right? And I'll have a couple of minutes if you have any doubts. If not, then we meet again tomorrow, and you can download the PDF. I will be uploading it on the Telegram channel in a few minutes. Okay? Tardigrade is an organism using diapause. Even though 1 year species, we concentrate 1.5 years. Other than that, I have already suggested that you watch certain docu-series like Life on Planet Earth, etc. But not now frantically before the exam, but in general, you can watch those docu-series because those become the picking points of UPSC for the exam as well. Okay? So see you guys tomorrow. Join us live at the same time. Take care. Goodbye. Thank you.